announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
Hello folks, welcome back. It's another episode of The Lore of the Ring. You heard correctly, today's episode is all about the New World Order. First off, I'd like to say thanks again to everyone who's been tuning in with me. This is episode 6. Hard to believe this is capping 3 full months of doing the show, so very thankful and blessed for all the positive feedback that I've got. And I appreciate everyone listening, supporting, telling friends, and tuning in. This episode, I put the poll out there. The 4 options were WCW Spring Stampede 94, WCW Starrcade 90, nWo Sold Out 97, and WCW Super Brawl 3. It was not even close. You could add up the other 3 options, and you wouldn't get, close to what nWo Sold Out 97 got. So that's what we're covering today. Let's go ahead and just jump right into it. nWo Sold Out 1997. That was the first and only pay-per-view that was branded as an nWo event. Eric Bischoff, he had a vision of the nWo becoming a standalone promotion, and this was a way of kind of testing the waters. Will it work? Can we do the nWo as their own commodity? Now, in storyline, this pay-per-view was a result of the nWo winning War Games at Fall Brawl 96 and being awarded their own show. Now, of course, pay-per-views are planned out year in advance, months in advance, and so they already knew they were going to be running a pay-per-view in January, but they made the decision to say, you know what, let's do that as our nWo pay-per-view. The nWo storyline was still white hot. Of course, in the summer of 96, you had Hulk Hogan turning on WCW, and then we've added members here and there. Kind of this invasion, we're taking over storyline that we'll discuss further as far as, some of the members and how they got there once we get through the show here. The event took place January 25th, 1997 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. January 25th, that was a Saturday. Which today it doesn't really seem weird, but at the time, wrestling pay-per-views were exclusively held on Sundays. This decision was made because there was a little game being played on the Sunday that weekend. It's called Super Bowl 31, Patriots and Packers. So definitely a smart move by Bischoff and WCW to move the pay-per-view to Saturday to avoid that head-to-head. 5,120 fans showed up there in Cedar Rapids. Is a sellout crowd, so nice crowd. It looked great on TV. It translated well. Now, before we get into the show, I'm going to read this little synopsis from our good friend Dave Meltzer. This is how he described Sold Out 97 in the Wrestling Observer magazine. He said, nWo sold out what came off to outsiders as the brainchild of someone intoxicated by his own success to the point of all perspective being lost, was the single worst pay-per-view show in the history of pro wrestling. Woof. Now, watching it back, this was the first time I'd watched it, start to finish in a long time. I'd turned it on as background noise, or I'd watched it here, a couple matches here and there throughout the years. But this was the first time that I've really watched it start to finish and really analyzed it. And, I remember watching it live in 97. This is probably the first time I paid attention to it like this since 97. Is it the worst pay-per-view of all time today in 2023? No. But is it good? Absolutely not. So let's get into it. Here we go. We've got a cool black and white video package showing a police escort to the arena. We've got a limo, semis, and garbage trucks rolling in, flying nWo flags, and members of the nWo are riding on the back, talking to the cameras, hyping the show, talking about how they're changing the world, they're taking over. And when they arrive, we see the nWo walking into the arena. Eric Bischoff may be the only person alive who can make a leather trench coat look so uncool. What a nerd. He just looked like a doofus walking in right there. And it kind of goes against the nWo was supposed to be the new cool thing, and he just made it look so nerdy. That segment was pre-taped the night before in Cedar Rapids, but that doesn't mean that it was rehearsed and it went according to plan. Like, if you watch this event and you see that open, you see just a random guy walking in before Hulk Hogan, and I say random guy because that's what he was. They asked Eric Bischoff on his podcast who was that guy, and it's just a guy who's probably been waiting around for his opportunity to get in camera with the NWO, and he walked into the building right in front of Hollywood Hogan. So that's going to be a theme. Not everything was well produced, rehearsed, and not everything went according to plan. We'll get into that more as we come across these little mishaps. Then we get our opening video package immediately after for the show, and it highlights Bischoff hyping the NWO Revolution. You got members of the NWO trashing WCW before we get into the actual arena, and we switch to color. So at this point, I remember thinking as a kid, is this whole thing going to be in black and white? Which kind of would have been cool, but I'm glad they didn't do it. The crowd is live, and it's a really cool setup for the show, honestly. You got black ropes, black turnbuckles, black mat and apron, which feature the NWO logo and spelled out on the apron, New World Order. Then the stage looks unlike what we usually get from WCW shows. You got black steps leading up to a platform area with 3 large video boards. And alongside each side of the steps, there's numerous show logos on some boxes and some bikers or motorcycles set up with women sitting on them. They're going to come into play later, unfortunately. And then atop the steps is a podium where Eric Bischoff welcomes us and throws to the core 3 NWO members on the video screens. But honestly, when it starts, it sounds like Bischoff is having audio problems. His mic is a lot quieter than the rock music that's playing, so you can barely hear what he's saying. But the package that we get from Hogan and the Outsiders is a very basic filler video package. And then we've got Eric Bischoff and Ted DiBiase. They're doing commentary tonight, so that makes sense. You know, Tony Schiavone, Mike Tenay, Bobby the Brain Heenan, anyone else that they could have had on commentary wouldn't have really made sense because you're really doing this thing as an nWo event, not a WCW event. So it makes sense that they have their own commentary team. And, you know, it's funny because Ted struggles with his headset, and I don't know. It's kind of one of those things, like, I kind of like the troubles that he has there and the trouble with Eric's audio because it makes it feel much more like a takeover. Like there's something raw and authentic about these imperfections, especially when you pair, with the arena setup. It's so different. It doesn't feel like this is the WCW production crew making this event. This feels like these guys are taking over, and it feels more authentic. It's time for our first match. It's Chris Jericho versus the NWO's first international member, Masahiro Chono. I do love about this show how the WCW guys don't have music, and Neil Pruitt, who is the iconic voice of the New World Order, that we heard before I came on tonight, and he's the one that says "loser" throughout this pay-per-view and New World Order and in the song and everything. So Neil Pruitt is the voice of the New World Order. He was a producer for WCW and helped with a lot of things backstage. But he does this cool thing throughout this show where he kind of mocks the WCW talent as they're walking to the ring. He announces Jericho as our first challenger from somewhere north of the border. Chris, I should have stayed with hockey, Jericho. Love it. Oh, and I love that it is Neil Pruitt. I like that they used him instead of someone else doing it. It makes it feel more cohesive with the NWO theme. He announces Chono as the baddest man from Japan. And then we got Nick Patrick as our referee for this match and every match on this card. That's impressive, number one. He deserved a big bonus for doing this, but it also is funny, Bischoff points out on commentary later how the WCW rather has a roster of referees. NWO just has the one. And he does a great job in this one of being the heel referee. He's got black jeans, black NWO shirt, and a black NWO cap turned backwards. So just his look is another great way to get over that he is a biased heel ref. And he does a great job at admonishing the WCW guys while letting the NWO guys get away with everything short of murder. As this match is getting started, we see Sister Sherry, Harlem Heat, the Faces of Fear, the Nasty Boys, Arn Anderson, Mongo and Deborah McMichael, and Pee Wee Randy Anderson make their way, and they sit in the crowd for this one. So that's another thing that I really liked is, the WCW talent, it's like it made it feel like they had to buy a ticket. They weren't welcome backstage. And so they had to observe with us common fans because this is not a WCW event. Really nice touch there. But despite this being an NWO branded event and the crowd being littered with fans wearing NWO shirts, Jericho's still getting babyface pops from the crowd, and Chono even receives WCW chants from the crowd to antagonize him, which is kind of funny because Jericho's not American. So you've got USA chants, and neither one of these guys are from the USA. But that's okay. You can let it slide. They were just trying to goad Chono there. DiBiase and Bischoff, they've got a great line in this one where Ted asks what STF stands for, and Eric says, it's motor oil, isn't it? I thought that was pretty funny. At one point in this match, Patrick counts very clearly slowly, and Bischoff says it appears that it was a bit of a fast count. Again, that's great stuff to set the tone that this is going to be a very biased show from commentary and the referee standpoint. We do have a pretty bad botch in this one, though, where Jericho was apparently supposed to reverse a diving attempt from Chono, but they kind of just both laid down on the mat for a minute until they corrected course, and it's very awkward looking. The finish comes, though, after Chono threw Jericho off the top rope through a table that he had set up at ringside earlier, and then he rolls Jericho into the match and delivers the Yakuza kick for the win. Meltzer gave it 2 stars in the Observer, and I'm fine with that rating, honestly. It was a decent little opener. I felt like it could have been better, especially with the talent in this one. But it got the crowd going. It went 11 minutes and 8 seconds. Bischoff said on his podcast that in hindsight, he wishes they would have, booked this one as a Japanese-style match. Chono wrestled a Jericho-style match in this one, but it would have played better, especially to the fans, if they would have done a Japanese, strong-style match. I thought that's a good point. I completely agree. After the match, we go to Bischoff and DiBiase, they're just sitting on roadie equipment cases on the stage there. There's not a desk or any chairs of any kind. So I like that as well. It's very informal. It's like, hey, we're cool, I guess. But they're talking about the Miss nWo contest and all the women who submitted entries. Since we're here, I'll say it. This is the worst thing I've ever seen on a wrestling pay-per-view. The Miss nWo crap almost makes this show unwatchable. It's a mixture between some okay-looking women and some who just look like school lunch ladies. The crowd chants boring, and who could blame them? This is a terrible segment here. Bischoff then throws to Jeff Katz, and he's the worst host for this contest they could have had, I think, because no one was prepped. These women didn't know what the question was. They didn't know what they were going to say. I guess he did okay. It's not really his fault. It's just whoever put the segment together. They should have prepped these women. But, he asked the first 2 women questions, and they can't think on the fly at all. They give the most uncharismatic answers possible, and they're just awkward as hell. Also, you can tell the difference between WWF and WCW here, because Vince McMahon would have put the best-looking women possible in that spot, and these women are just not that at all. Bischoff even says on his podcast that when he sent people out to find these women, he told them, don't bring me back the hottest women possible. Don't bring me back the hottest women in the Midwest. I want the everyday woman. I want to do something different. Everyone who books this is going to put hot women. Bring me something different. And they did, but why? It was just bad. Next up, we get a very confusing match, and I'll explain why it's confusing when we get into it, but it's Big Bubba, a.k.a., or I guess formerly known as the Big Boss Man, and then he will become that again, obviously, when he goes back to the WWE or WWF. But it's Big Bubba here, and he was a member of the nWo for a whopping 3 months. And he's going up against Hugh Morris with manager Jimmy Hart in a Mexican street fight. I don't know why it's called a Mexican street fight, because number 1, we're in Iowa, and number 2, it's 2 white guys. There's not a Mexican in the match. But here we are. Hugh Morris is out first, and he's got no music, of course. And Big Bubba is out next, so he's got a live band that's playing all the nWo guys to the ring. Now, when Big Bubba's coming out, Neil Pruitt says, "This is Big Bubba. He should flatten Conan like a Mexican tortilla in no time." So that makes you think there's supposed to be Conan in this match, and then it was. On Tony Schiavone's podcast, I found out that Conan was actually scheduled for this match originally, but he was given the night off to work a show in Mexico. It's just weird to me that they didn't promote the match differently. They just played it off as Big Bubba is just targeting all members of the Dungeon of Doom. He already took out Conan, so who's next? But still, they could have just called it a street fight, leave out the Mexican part, and we would have been fine. But that's not what they did. The match sucked, though. It was just bad. Nick Patrick was trying to enforce rules in a street fight. Okay. He counted to break up holds. When they're in the ropes, he tried to get the guys back into the ring. He started counting to 10 when they're outside the ring. But he did do the heel ref move, though. He looked the other way when Big Bubba cheated. So that's fine, but it was unneeded in this match. It's a street fight. Jimmy Hart did get some kicks in on Big Bubba on the outside of the ring, which the fans loved, but it didn't make the match any less awful. We get a chain involved. That's right, a metal chain gets involved. And Bubba whips Hugh Morris with it, and it was brutal looking. Like, he was just swinging it with no regard. So I guess that's the highlight of this match. Morris also hits a beautiful moonsault inside the ring. And while he's down, Patrick starts half-heartedly counting to 10. So I guess that's the way this match is supposed to end. A Mexican death match ends when one man can't answer a 10 count. So I guess a last man standing rule. But it wasn't explained at all. Commentary didn't mention it. We got no knowledge of the actual rules in this one. After this, they fight back up the entrance ramp, and Hugh Morris attempts another moonsault, this time off the steps onto the platform area, but Big Bubba rolls out of the way, and that sets up our finish. Bubba walks down the aisle and kicks one of the women off a motorcycle and rides it up the ramp and runs over Hugh Morris. You heard me correctly. Hugh Morris got ran over by a motorcycle on this pay-per-view. He obviously stayed down for the 10 count, which Nick Patrick, for some reason, ran back to the ring to deliver, and he counted really fast. I don't know why he didn't just count there on the spot. He had to be inside the ring. But, terrible match. It went 9 minutes, 3 seconds. Meltzer gave it a half a star. The next night on Monday Night Nitro, Hugh Morris is there. He's not limping. He's not bandaged up. He's fully recovered from getting ran over with a motorcycle. Ugh. Back to Jeff Katz now, and his mic isn't working at first. Wish it would have stayed that way. He's interviewing more of these Miss nWo contestants, and the first one gave the same answer as one of the previous women. Whatever it takes. Please end this. Katz calls the second woman buoyant, referring to her big bosoms. Thankfully, that's all from him at this point. We just get two at a time here, and now we got Bischoff and DiBiase talking about the website. And that was kind of crazy to watch. They're talking about the nWo's website, and they show it on the screen. It's just crazy to see how far technology has come in these last 26 years. It's time for our next match, though. It's Jeff Jarrett, who the announcer says is, this redneck is from Music City, Tennessee, or Music City, USA. And he's set to face Michael Wall Street, who may be the one guy who made the nWo look the least cool. He joined the nWo in December, but was forced out in April. And then he left WCW altogether in the summer. He left for New Japan Pro Wrestling. So a very short run as well for Michael Wall Street. Match had absolutely no crowd heat. No one cared. Storyline in this one was between Jeff Jarrett and Mongo and Deborah McMichael, not Wall Street. Jarrett was brought in as a free agent, and he was being recruited, when he came back to the company, came to WCW here. He was being recruited by the nWo, but ultimately joined the Horsemen, even though it was never really a smooth, trusting relationship. So Jarrett and Deborah, they did mesh well, which DiBiase put over on commentary, so that was a good job of putting that over by Ted. But the finish comes 9 minutes and 22 seconds into the match when Deborah makes Mongo help Double J. Mongo hits Wall Street with the Halliburton briefcase, and that got the biggest pop of the night to this point. And then he makes Nick Patrick count to 3. He intimidated him to count to 3. Got a dud rating from Meltzer and a dud from me. Just a terrible, terrible match. But, speaking of terrible, we're back to Jeff Katz again. He's got more contestants here, which he calls the senior division. And he asks the first woman which part of her anatomy will help her win the contest, and she says her feet. What? I guess this lady has a foot fetish or thinks that every guy has a foot fetish. What a weird answer. And then the second woman can't hear the question at all. And so Kat says that her hearing aid's not turned up, and that may have disqualified her, but it didn't. She was still eligible to win at the end. Great quality content here, guys. Awful. The next match is between two former tag team partners. This one was set up at the end of November. The nWo gave the WCW roster a chance to join the nWo and not be, and be safe from being targeted by the nWo. And the American males came out to the ring to accept. Marcus Alexander Bagwell, he jumped at the chance, but Scotty Riggs was hesitant, so Bagwell jumped him, and thus birthing the Buff Bagwell era. It's funny because when talking about Buff Bagwell, Eric Bischoff said that that's just who Bagwell was. He said if you've ever had a conversation with him, you know that he's just very arrogant and makes everything about him, and he's very, out there and all about himself and consider himself a pretty boy. So the Buff Bagwell character was just a way to try to get the real Bagwell on TV. This match, though, it was okay. The announcer, he announces Riggs on the way to the ring as he's always been number 2, American male loser, Scotty Riggs. And that was about the funniest thing that happened in this one. Something odd happened where Riggs hip tossed Buff over the top rope to the floor, which at the time was against the rules in WCW. You couldn't throw an opponent over the top rope. It's supposed to be a disqualification, but Nick Patrick did not DQ him. So that was weird. Like if Buff did that to Riggs, I would understand the decision to let it go. But Riggs doing it, that could have been an easy win for the nWo. Not sure why Patrick didn't call the match right then. But match has some decent back and forth, and the crowd is actually surprisingly into it. At the end, Buff hits his new finisher, the Blockbuster, the Buff Blockbuster, off the top rope, and he gets the pinfall. Lengthy match, 13 minutes, 51 seconds. Dave would give it just a star and a quarter, but I don't think it was that bad. It was probably the best match of the night so far, which isn't really saying much. Surprisingly, this match was just as good as the Jericho and Chono match to me. Back to Jeff Katz. And he's got a couple more Miss nWo contestants. And the first one, you know what, I'll keep it to myself. She can't hear his question, which adds to how painful it was to watch. And then contestant number 8, to me, honestly, is the most attractive contestant of the night, but it's still just such a dumb competition. It's just awful. Not scripted, not rehearsed, bad. Time for another match, and it's DDP who gets a decent pop. He's over at this point. His career is really starting to take off around this time in early 97. And he's set to face Scott Norton. He says that DDP will pay for rejecting the offer to join the nWo. During the match, the fans start going crazy and pointing. And, the camera finally goes over to see what they're looking at, and it's Sting. Sting has arrived. But that's the last we see of him. It's weird. Why? Why even do that? Why even show him at all? And I'll tell you later where I think he should have got involved. But it is what it is. Later in the match, Norton's tag team partner Buff Bagwell comes out with a mic and says it's time for DDP to join the nWo. They like him. They want him in the group. Buff, Big Bubba, Wall Street, and Vincent, they all surround him in the ring with the recruiting pitch. And Norton looks hesitant at first. He looks upset that they're doing this, but Paige accepts, puts on the nWo shirt. Norton's like, all right, that's fine. Let's do this. Let's shake hands. But Paige says, nah, I was just kidding. He hits him with the diamond cutter and then runs away through the crowd and rips off the nWo shirt. Officially, the match is a count out, and Scott Norton wins in 9 minutes, 39 seconds. Half a star from Meltzer. Maybe a little low. I mean, it wasn't anything special, but, DDP was over, and the whole recruiting pitch to him and him escaping through the crowd, it was entertaining, honestly. Not a bad match. Jeff Katz's mic isn't working again. Recurring theme. But he's finally interviewing the last 2 contestants. Thank God that's over. I'm going to move on from that segment. Now we've got our run of good matches here. I say our run, it's only 2, but next match, you got the tag titles on the line. The nWo tag titles, because it's Hall and Nash. The Outsiders are the champs. And the Steiners are out first. That's the opponents, the challengers. And Neil Pruitt says, look at the 2 dog-faced Michigan mutts, mongrels, Rick and Scott Steiner. Great stuff there from Pruitt. It's just great heel stuff. The Outsiders come out, and they're the first ones to use the traditional nWo music here. The other guys had an alternative theme that was played by, I think, a live band. There was drums over there and the guitars. I think they were playing it live, but regardless, these 2 come out to the traditional nWo music. The crowd is into this match, and rightfully so. This is 2 of the best tag teams of all time, and one of the better matches on the card. At one point, Nash spit on Scott Steiner, who was on the apron, and as Nick Patrick turned to keep Scott from getting into the ring, Rick Steiner hit Kevin Nash with a low blow to swing momentum. So that's good stuff there, kind of leveling the playing field. Nick Patrick takes a bump in this one, and he's down and unable to count after a Scott Hall outsider's edge. But then Rick Steiner jumps off the top rope and hits a top rope bulldog to Hall. And then we got our controversy. Pee Wee Anderson, who I told you was sitting in the crowd earlier with the WCW Superstars, he runs in from the crowd, and he counts the pinfall. He's a referee. I can do this. 1, 2, 3, new champs. The Steiners are the new champs, but it wouldn't last long. The next night on Nitro, Bischoff was livid. He fired Anderson on the spot and returned the titles to outsiders, said that Anderson was not a sanctioned referee for the NWO's event. So that was a decent little storyline there with Randy Anderson. I mean, his church and his community got so upset because Anderson had kids and they thought he was legit fired. They rode into WCW and called WCW and pitched a fit to Bischoff, telling him to rehire him. So great storyline there from Eric Bischoff. But Meltzer would give the match 2.25 stars. Match went 14:43 seconds. This was the best match of the night so far. And I say so far because this next one actually is a banger. Finally. It's Eddie Guerrero, one of the all-time greats, versus Six, a.k.a. 123 Kid, a.k.a. X-Pac, a.k.a. Sean Waltman, also one of the all-time greats. And it's a ladder match for the U.S. title. This match was set up when Eddie Guerrero beat DDP at Starrcade 96 to win the vacant U.S. title. But after he won after the NWO attacked DDP. And then after the match, Eddie confronted the NWO for jumping DDP, so the NWO attacked him. And Six stole the belt and ran off. When Eddie Guerrero was coming to the ring, Neil Pruitt calls him a Mexican jumping bean, which is something. Doesn't really translate well in 2023. Then Six is announced as the true U.S. champ, or the rightful U.S. champ, one of those. And that's just, I wish they would have mentioned, there was no video packages for the storylines, how we got here. Most of the matches didn't have storylines, or if they did, they were very minor. But, it would have been cool for Bischoff and DiBiase to at least mention how we got here and why they're going after, the title in a ladder match. But that's fine. This match was awesome. Two of the best workers in the business, and they delivered. High-flying, fast-paced banger. Once the ladder got involved, we got a lot of our familiar ladder spots, but at the time, in 1997, these spots weren't so familiar. The ladder match was still a fairly new concept, We're not that far removed from Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels having the first popular ladder match of all time. So this is groundbreaking stuff here. They both climb up the ladder at one point, and while they're up there, Six drop-kicked Eddie off the top of the ladder. I mean, that's a big bump to take. And then they climb back up, and while they're up top, Six knocks Guerrero off. And when Guerrero falls, he bounces off the ropes and falls backwards into the ladder, which sends Six down to the mat. The finish is a kind of fun finish for a ladder match. Both guys grab the belt. They're atop the ladder, and they're reaching for the belt, struggling. They both get it down at the same time with their hands on it. So they're struggling for possession of the belt at the top. But then Eddie jerks it away, so he's got control, and he smashes Six in the face with it, sending him crashing down to the mat. So Eddie's the new U.S. champ. 13 minutes, 50 seconds, 4 stars for Meltzer. By far the best match on the show. It doesn't get better than this. This is the cream of the crop, so if you only want to watch one match from this show, I recommend it be this one. The rest is probably going to disappoint you. Meltzer gave it 4 stars, like I said, and he also said this about the match. Bischoff spent more time trying to get over the fact that he knows karate and Scott Hall invented ladder matches than build drama in a damn good match. Actually, most people didn't even recognize this as anything more than an average match when it was a great effort by both. So pretty harsh criticism there by Meltzer, but he's got a point. I mean, a lot of the commentary was just talking about how much Scott Hall invented the ladder match, and he's probably been training Six. And you mention it once and you move on, but that's not what happened. And then Bischoff would talk about how, he knows karate. He was doing it in a way to say, to compliment Six, like, hey, I'm an expert in karate, so I can tell you that his kicks are really good, and he's really good at this stuff. But he just did it so often that it was kind of distracting from the match. And then, speaking of distracting, this is the worst kind of distraction we could have. It's the finals of the Miss NWO contest. Katz is going to introduce each woman to the crowd, and we get a few stats about them up on the screen, including their name, their measurements, which is wild that they did that, and their occupation, and then their hobbies. Okay, so in these contestants, we've got a warehouse worker, a subcontractor, a banker, a nurse, a school bus driver, a semi-retired woman, a homemaker, a grain inspector, whatever that is, and a shipping clerk. Okay. And one of the contestants went out of order, so they showed the wrong name. They ended up showing the same name card and stats twice in a row because one of the women was out of order. So I don't know what her occupation was. Not that it matters. Anyway, Bischoff came down and he picked the winner. He said that it's tied between two women right now, but he's going to ask them each a question that we can't hear, only he can hear, and only she can hear. So he whispered into these women's ears, and they answered him, and then he was going to pick a winner. Okay. He picks one of the women, and he made out with her twice. And all I got to say is, yuck. What the hell was he thinking? I mean, this lady, I'm just gonna be nice. It's fine. But also, Eric Bischoff's married. He said that his wife and kids were like, what is he doing? But I agree. Just that when he says that that's what everyone else would have done the opposite, he's not wrong. Because Vince McMahon, he wasn't that long after this that he had a affair on screen with Trish Stratus. Let me just tell you, Bubba, this woman that won this contest that Eric Bischoff made out with, she's no Trish Stratus. Not even in the same stratosphere. But anyway, the lady gets some flowers. She gets a Miss nWo sash, which is put on upside down. She gets an nWo crown. She makes a lap down around the ring, and then she comes back up top to sit on an nWo throne, which was just a giant black toilet. What a waste of time this was. Here's how Meltzer described it. Miss nWo finally ended with a sight of Bischoff French kissing an overweight mid-50s woman to no cheers, even fewer laughs, and a lot of gagging around the country. By this time, the show was about as much fun to watch as 3 hours of somebody masturbating. In fact, I'm not sure that isn't what we were watching. I don't know what that means, Dave, but yeah, it wasn't good at all. Sure. So anyway, main event time. It's the Giants out first. He's referred to as the nWo's biggest fan by Neil Pruitt. Remember, he was kicked out of the nWo after Starrcade back in December because he didn't help Hogan win his match against Roddy Piper. And then he was upset. He never got his title match. He won World War III earlier in '96 and never got his title match that he was entitled to. So here it is. Hogan finally said, okay, you want your title match? I think he said it on Saturday night, WCW Saturday night, which RIP that part of my childhood. But he gets his match here, and I'm sure it's not what he envisioned, though. You get a little video package playing from Hogan to the arena, and then the champ is out being accompanied by Vincent, as well as 3 Dallas Cowboys, Nate Newton, George Teague, and Ray Donaldson. Random. Don't know why 3 Dallas Cowboys were in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Hogan does a good job of putting over the Giant in this one. He makes him look intimidating, and Hogan was scared and looked overpowered unless he cheated. So Hogan did play that chicken heel character very well. The Giant looked in complete control for most of this match, unless Hogan took shortcuts or when the Giant missed a diving elbow attempt off the top rope. That's an impressive sight. You heard me right. The Giant, the Big Show, Paul White, jumped off the top rope and tried an elbow drop like he's Macho Man Randy Savage. He missed, but man, that was awesome. The Giant does hit a choke slam in this one, and he pins Hogan, but Nick Patrick stops on 2 twice. He says that Hogan got his shoulder up despite not moving at all. And then when the Giant pins him again, Patrick just stops and clutches his shoulder like he was hurting. The Giant chokeslams Nick Patrick, and then all hell breaks loose. The nWo B team, as they're referred to, they come out and attack the Giant, and he fights them all off. And I say the B team because Hall and Nash, they were in no hurry to get out there. They just wanted to let the other guys get beat up. They didn't want to look weak. And they fight him off, but then Hogan's got a guitar. He's got an nWo guitar, and he hits the Giant in the back with him, knocks him out. So he's laying face down in the ring. They spray paint nWo on his back while the crowd chants, "We want Sting, we want Sting." But we don't get him. That's it. So earlier I mentioned Sting's there. They showed him on camera. Why not have him come to the ring with his bat and run the nWo off? He doesn't have to touch anyone. But he's got his bat. He looks intimidating. He's still playing like which side is he on, which we haven't got there, that part of the Sting character yet, I don't believe. But, do that. But we don't get it. Match is over. 10 minutes, 52 seconds, a negative 1.5 star rating from Meltzer, and the show ends with the ring full of the nWo celebrating. Honestly, it's a pretty bad show, for being honest. The charm of the gimmick wore off very quickly. And, the cheating ref and biased commentary, it wore old quickly. At first, I enjoyed it. I thought, it's edgy, it's different, but it didn't work. The Wrestling Observer readers, they agreed. 97.8% of readers gave it a thumbs down. It's not hard to see why they didn't do future events, marketed solely as nWo branded shows. And it's not hard to see why they decided not to do the nWo as a standalone brand like they were planning on. At the end of the show, though, you've got 8 matches. WCW's win-loss record was 3-5 in this one, so the nWo won 5 of the 8 matches. And it's not hard to see why. You've got a cheating ref, and it's home field advantage. And one of those wins from WCW was going to be overturned the very next night because Pee Wee Anderson actually counted to 3. So, really 2-6. We'll get into the fun part of the show here, the Shockmaster shockingly bad moment of the show. I wanted to pick their camera on a pole that they used way too often. It looked like it was drone footage, but from a very crappy, no offense to Android users, but look, the jokes. Looked like somebody's filming this with an Android or filming it with a toaster. But it was just, when they zoomed out, you would just see a camera guy at ringside, and he's got this long pole, and he's holding it high above the ring, and it's just a terrible quality camera on it, like a handheld camcorder. Wanted to pick that, but I didn't. I wanted to pick the Jeff Jarrett and Wall Street match. I wanted to pick plenty other stuff, but I've complained about it all show, so it's no secret. The Miss nWo contest, that's the Shockmaster shockingly bad moment of this pay-per-view. Woof. Yuck. The RVD 5-star moment had to be Eddie Guerrero versus Six. I mean, that was a great match. By far the best thing on the show, the most entertaining, and the thing that single-handedly stands up, whereas a lot of this other stuff does not hold up over time. Next episode, I told you last episode, we're going to change the poll so that we're not just doing... I got a feeling that if I put 4 different promotions on the poll each week, then WWF/WWE is going to win every week. So to keep that from happening, we're going to do brand-specific or promotion-specific polls. Last poll was all WCW, so this one we're going back to the land of the extreme. Here's the poll options for this next upcoming poll, which you can vote on Twitter at loreofthering_. You can also follow me on Twitter at DMFrank_. Be on the lookout. Vote in these polls if you want to see one of these be the winner. First poll option is Barely Legal 97. This was their first pay-per-view ever, and it featured Rob Van Dam versus Lance Storm, Taz versus Sabu, and then you had Terry Funk versus Raven for the ECW World Heavyweight title. Second poll option is WrestlePalooza 98. This one features the BWO, the Blue World Order, versus the FBI, Bam Bam Bigelow versus New Jack, Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman versus the Dudley Boys, and Shane Douglas versus Al Snow for the ECW World Heavyweight title. Third poll option, Anarchy Rules 99. This one features Tajiri versus Super Crazy versus Little Guido, Just Incredible versus Sabu, and Rob Van Dam versus Balls Mahoney for the ECW World TV title. Last poll option, Guilty as Charged 2001. This was the final ECW event that was televised or broadcast ever. Some matches highlighted on this one are Tajiri and Mikey Whipwreck versus Kid Cash and Super Crazy versus the FBI. The Sandman versus Steve Corino versus Just Incredible for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship. And RVD versus Jerry Lynn. So be sure to look out for that poll. I'll put it out in the coming days. Be sure to vote. Be sure to share it. Be sure to tell a friend, tell a fan, tell everyone. Subscribe to the show, share the show. You can find me on all the platforms. So if someone asked, can you listen to it on fill in the blank? Yes, you can. Appreciate everyone listening. Again, be sure to hit me with any feedback. And with that, nWo Sold Out 97 is down for the 3 count. So long from the Volunteer State.